Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is Geoff with Fluent American checking in again today. We're streaming live to YouTube and also on Lang 8. As always, we have a topic for today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a TOEFL listening section. So for those of you preparing for tests like IELTS or TOEFL, this is going to be a helpful video for you. Of course, if you have other pronunciation type questions that I can help you with, be sure to let me know. You can post them into the chat box, and I'll be happy to try and assist with that. We're also trying a new feature as well, something that you can see on the YouTube stream. I've posted a link to a Google Doc. So if you would like me to listen to your pronunciation and you want to get some quick feedback, I've posted a link to a Google Doc where you can send me a file to your pronunciation, and I'll try to get back to you. Hey, Candy, thanks for checking in today. So again, because I know last time we did this where we were reviewing pronunciation, people had some trouble sending me the links. So that's why I've created the Google Docs, so that way you can post the link there, and hopefully YouTube doesn't consider it spam or anything like that. Okay. Also, just a quick note, it is lunchtime in my house, so you may hear some background noise from my son with like pots and pans and things like that. And of course, as always, if you have questions related to pronunciation, you can always let us know by posting something into the chat box. But that said, so again, today we're going to be looking at a TOEFL listening test as well as the transcript from that test. And we're going to be paying attention to a couple things. We're going to be trying to identify stress. We're going to be trying to identify things related to linking, things related to intonation. One thing that I like about the TOEFL test, maybe a little bit even more so than for the IELTS test, is that I think the materials that they choose for listening, I mean, yeah, it's going to be artificial. So like it's not entirely authentic. You know, the conversations they're having on the TOEFL tests aren't always exactly what you would have in real life. But I do think they sound a little bit more natural than what you would find in a TOEFL test situation. Okay, so give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen and my sound. And again, you can hear this and see this on YouTube. If you're watching on Lang 8, you'll kind of just have to bear with me, and I'll try to explain the things I'm hearing and things like that as well. Okay, give me a moment to share. Let's see what we got. So we're going to share screen. Share system audio. Okay. All right, so you guys should now be able to see everything. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So on the right, you're going to see the transcript for the audio that we're going to take a look at. And then on the left, you can see the audio file that I'm going to be using. Okay. And of course, as I go through this, if you see other things that you have questions about for pronunciation, be sure to let me know. I'm going to put on my headphones so that way I can listen to the audio as well. And let's get right into it. Again, trying to identify things like stress and things like that.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a librarian.
And again, that's so I just gave the descriptions there. So again, typically on the TOEFL test, you're going to hear a voice just like that. So they'll give directions. Important to listen to the directions, and then they play the audio. I strongly recommend as you listen to the audio, usually give you note paper, you want to write down notes on keywords, because otherwise it's just going to be too difficult to remember all the information that you need. I also recommend, if you're taking the IELTS test or the TOEFL test, try to look at the questions that you need to answer in the moments before the listening actually starts. So that way you actually know what type of answers you need to give. Otherwise it's going to be very difficult. Okay, so let's listen to this first part.
Hi, I'm new here.
So how about that part? Hi, I'm new here. So you have this thought group. Okay, so you can hear the conversation kind of break there after hi. It's like, hi, pause. I'm new here. And notice that when he's saying here, he has this rising intonation. I'm new here. I'm new here. Okay, so I'm going to mark that off as just a rise. Hi, I'm new here. Let's put that again so you can hear it.
A conversation between a student and a librarian. Hi, I'm new here.
Okay, Okay, so hi, I'm new here. And what does that mean by having that rising intonation on the here? Well, I think that's going to be really helpful because by rising on the here, what you're doing is you're signifying to the person that you're talking to that there's more that you want to say, that you're not done talking. Um, so I think that's really helpful to have that rising intonation. Like I'm new here, whereas if you said I'm new here, that kind of sounds like you're ending the conversation or you're ending the dialogue. So by using that here, it's like saying that maybe you're about to ask a question or you're looking for information. You need something from the person that you're talking to. I'm new here. Also, just in terms of stress, what words being stressed here? Um,
Hi, I'm new here.
I'm new here. I'm new here. We say it all the time. English is a stress time language. So notice that new is the word that's getting that extra emphasis. I'm new here. I'm new here. So that's the word that you're holding longer because it's stressed. And also what you're doing is it has a slightly higher pitch. I'm new here. I'm new here. And that these are how you demonstrate that you're emphasizing something. This is the most important word. I'm new here.
I couldn't come to the student orientation.
I couldn't come to the student orientation. I couldn't come to the student orientation.
Hi, I'm new here.
Hey, Hisham, thanks for joining us for today. If you have questions about pronunciation of things, be sure to let me know.
Couldn't come to the student orientation.
Um, I couldn't come to the student orientation. I couldn't come, so stress on come to the student orientation. Hisham, thanks so much for the heart. I just couldn't come to the student orientation, so also stress on orientation there. Candy, I see your question. I'll be there in a moment. Just want to play that one part again.
Librarian. Hi, I'm new here. I couldn't come to the student orientation.
I couldn't come to the student orientation. I couldn't come to the student orientation. So I'm hearing a thought group that ends on come and then one that ends on orientation. There's that pause. Okay, before we take a look at our next part, so we have a question from Candy. I'm struck with English. By struck, I'm guessing that you mean stuck, like you're stuck in your English. Can I level up my level? Yeah, for sure. Why not? All it takes is time. The secret to any language learning is just time. If you're feeling stuck, that may mean that in terms of your language learning, you may be doing things that are inside of your comfort zone. So it could entirely be that you're doing routines, and things like that. And well, I mean, if you're always doing the same thing, or if you're not really pushing yourself with language, I think it's easy to feel like you plateau, you get stuck at a certain level. If you're finding that your language isn't growing, then I recommend trying to find new opportunities to use your language, whether that means finding new ways to interact with native speakers, doing things to, for instance, one suggestion I often give to students is, take classes in subjects that interest you, but in English. So for instance, if you're interested in art, maybe signing up for an art class, in English, or if you're interested in like history or something like that, you could sign up for like a community college class, for instance, in the US or something like that. There are ways to find new ways to interact with the language. So I definitely encourage that. Another thing too, if you're feeling stuck, like you're not really improving, actually just made a video on the YouTube channel that talks about reasons why people's pronunciation doesn't seem to improve, or why people feel stuck for pronunciation. So trying to find as many opportunities as you can to use the language, new opportunities, pushing yourself. So for instance, if you're used to studying listening just by watching movies and things like that, that's great, but maybe not enough to really boost your level. So what I would encourage you to try to be more active. If you're watching a movie, make a goal for yourself. Be like, okay, by the end of this movie, I want to learn 2 or 3 new words, or I want to find new expressions. Or as I listen, I'm going to try to identify which word is being stressed in the sentence, or I'm going to try to identify, specific things. Hello, Iman. Hello, Lana, all the people who joined on the Lang 8 stream. So I think like setting different goals like that can be really helpful for your listening. And that's something I really would encourage, or even just for your general language ability. Okay. As we go through this again, let's move back to the TOEFL. Okay. And again, if you follow on the stream, YouTube.com/Fluent American. You can hear the actual audio. So let's listen to those first two
Hi,
sentences again.
I'm new here. I couldn't come to the student orientation.
I couldn't come to the student orientation. Couldn't come to the student orientation. I couldn't come to this student orientation. I think it's helpful as I go through this to kind of shadow with me, whether you're on the YouTube stream or on Lang 8. Practice saying this with me. Just kind of paying attention to, where am I raising my voice? Where am I lowering it? What words am I emphasizing? And things like that. I think that can be really helpful. Treat it as almost like a shadowing exercise. Can be good.
And I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers.
And I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers. So notice how they say that part there. Play that again. Let's see if we can identify thought groups. So again, if you're not sure what thought groups are places where you can pause in your speech to kind of break up what you're saying.
Couldn't come to the student orientation, and I'm wondering if you can give me a few.
I'm wondering if you can give me a. That's kind of where I'm actually hearing the thought group end the most. I'm wondering if you can give me a. And this actually brings up a point that I see with a lot of my students with sentences. A lot of English language learners tend to have shorter thought groups, sentences that run a little bit shorter. And the impact of that is that you're going to add more stresses to your sentences. And by adding more stresses to your sentences, it can make your speech sound a little bit choppier as opposed to having sections that really run together and flow. Hello, Castria. Thanks so much for joining us. So I recommend experimenting with your thought groups, like how long your sections are when you're speaking. It's okay to have short thought groups, but experiment, see what it's like if you have longer thought groups. How does that impact your speech? So I really like this thought group here from that TOEFL test where it's a little bit longer, not as many thought groups, not as many stresses. Just listen to the section one more time.
Couldn't come to the student orientation, and I'm wondering if you can give me a.
In fact, I would even say that and has a little bit of a pause before it. And I'm wondering if you can give me a. And also notice this pattern. This is a pretty common pattern, intonation pattern with the phrase like I'm wondering. I'm wondering if you can. I'm wondering if you could. I'm wondering if they can. Like these sorts of situations, very common pattern. I'm wondering. Notice that wondering has that really high pitch. If you can, and everything else after that has a much lower pitch. So I think that's a pretty common pattern that you're going to see in English. So I really do like that there. I'm wondering if you can. Let's play that back one last time.
Student orientation, and I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library.
Few quick pointers. So this is another. I really like this section here. So a few quick pointers. This is another part of English that's super natural sounding. And what's happening? So this is what I call like a 3-word group. Few quick pointers. And this happens where in English you have like 3 words that kind of work together. Few quick pointers. And typically what happens when you have this pattern, this sort of like 3-word group, what typically happens is that you put a little bit of stress on the first word and then a heavier stress on the last word. It's like few, quick. The middle word, notice, has lower pitch and it's going to be a little faster. Few quick pointers. And by doing these types of groups, this is again a very natural pattern. You're going to see this with like adjective, noun, or like adverb, adjective, noun, or sometimes even like a negative verb, noun. It's like, or like he didn't like dinner. Or again, adverb, adjective, noun, like very tall man. There's a very tall man. Situations like that are really common. So we also see this here. A few quick pointers. Let's play the next part.
And I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library.
So how about this part here? So this is actually a sentence. This is not a question. I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library. So technically, again, this is a sentence. It's not actually a question. Okay. You know this because you see I'm wondering. I'm is your subject. Wondering is your verb. But they're making it into a question by having that rising intonation at the end. About the library, e. So this is, if you have a yes, no question in English, this is similar to Romance languages, so for Italian speakers, Spanish speakers, French speakers, things like that. What you do to show a question is use a rising intonation, like rise, rise. So that's what we see here. Even though it's a sentence, they put that rising intonation at the end to signify that it's actually kind of a question. They're seeking help. I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library, rising, and then that last part.
And I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library. I'd really appreciate it.
I'd really appreciate it. Now, let's talk a little bit about stress. You could say this sentence as I'd really appreciate it. I'd really appreciate it, where you put the stress on appreciate, and that's perfectly fine. To add extra emphasis or to add extra emotion, what you can do is you can actually put the stress onto really. And this is something that you're going to see native speakers do very, very often, but that you're going to see language learners do much less often. Typically, language learners are not putting as much stress on these adverbs before verbs, whereas native speakers are doing it a lot. And this is a technique that you can do to immediately sound a little bit more natural, because these adverbs just add a little bit of flavor, make your language sound a little bit more interesting and engaging, a little bit more of an emotional pull, a little bit stronger. It's like, I'd really appreciate it. Like, I'd really appreciate it. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you, Cassia, for the follow. That's great. So instead of saying I'd really appreciate it, you can say I'd really appreciate it. It just makes it sound even more grateful in this situation. I'd really appreciate it. A more general way of saying this, again, would be I'd really appreciate it. So let's kind of play this whole first paragraph again. If you have questions about it, be sure to let me know. Also, another reminder too, for those of you who are seeing this on YouTube, I have posted a link, which you should be able to see on your screen, which again, if you want to get an actual sentence analyzed by me in a Google Doc, you can take a look at that link I've just posted in the chat, or I posted at the beginning of the chat. It has a little sentence that you can read for me. So if, for instance, our sentence here is, this city isn't as big as his. This city isn't as big as his. So that's a sentence you can practice reading for me. To send the audio file, what you need to do is you can go to vocaroo.com. You'll make a little audio file. So for instance, you can see here, I'll say something like this. This is my test file. Then I'll close it, and you see it will give me an option to save and share. And then I get this link, and I can copy this link and put it right into the document. Okay, so you can see I just posted a link right there. Okay. Hello, Madise. Thank you so much for joining us. So if you want to get some actual audio reviewed by me today, that is an option for you as well. Okay, so just take a look at that in the Google Doc. All right, going back to our TOEFL listening. And again, if you're following on the Lang 8 stream, if you go to youtube.com/Fluent American, you'll actually can hear the audio that I'm using for these notes. And you also see the transcript as well. Let's go to, so we're going to play that whole first paragraph again.
Brian. Hi, I'm new here. I couldn't come to the student orientation, and I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library. I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, so that was the audio for the first paragraph. Just one last note I want to make. Notice how he says pointers, a few quick pointers. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, this is how a lot of my students would say pointers. And lots of native speakers do as well. Obviously, it's very natural sounding. But what you'll often also hear in North American English, American English, is you'll often hear that T sound disappear, just a note, okay? So you're very likely to, instead of hearing pointers, you're very likely to hear the word pointers, pointers. Some other words that do this, so for instance, a word like center, instead of saying center, you could say center. Or for instance, advantage, instead of saying advantage, you could say advantage. Lots of other words too, like dentist versus dentist, or interview versus interview, things like that. So again, N plus T, usually that T sound is going to disappear. Okay, so it's not going to be as common. All right, lots of new people joining on the Lang 8 stream, which is great. Welcome. If you want to hear the audio I'm using and see the transcript we're using, you can visit youtube.com/Fluent American to see our stream there. All right, so let's take a look at our second paragraph. It's a short one. It's just librarian giving 2 quick sentences.
Sure, I'd be glad to.
So we get that. Sure, I'd be glad to. Sure, I'd be glad to. So which words do you think are being stressed here? Sure, I'd be glad to. Sure, I'd be glad to. Which words do you think I'm emphasizing? Which words am I stressing? Which words are they stressing? First one is going to be sure. And then how about this next one? We get I'd be glad to. I'd be glad to. The stress here is falling, on glad. We come in here, so my comments keep getting deleted, not sure why. Oh no! I'll definitely be checking things. Just try to figure out why are people's comments getting deleted. Thank you for letting me know. I'm glad that one made it through. Appreciate it. You can also again in the Google Doc too. If you have a comment you want to leave, you can leave it in the Google Doc there, and I'll see it too. Sorry about that. Not sure what's going on. Hello, examination. The examination mentions that they are Japanese. That's great. If you have some questions for me about pronunciation, be sure to let me know what exactly your question is. I'll be happy to help. So your stress again is going to be on sure and also on glad. And if you're not sure what words are getting stressed, like how do you make a decision? We have a whole playlist on YouTube that just goes over deciding what words to stress and why. But the biggest thing you want to pay attention to, words that typically get stressed in English, are nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Out of those, typically verbs do not get stressed because what English does is it prefers to stress the last major content word. So the last major noun, adjective, or whatever. And typically the last major word is going to be a noun. Okay, so it's just very rare that verbs get stressed, though it is possible. Same thing with adjectives. If you have a sentence like, oh, I'm happy. Well, in that case, happy falls at the end of your sentence, so it's going to get stressed. So that's fine. But typically happy goes before a noun. So in that case, because it's going before a noun, you would actually typically stress the noun, like I'm a happy person. In that case, you would stress person most likely because that's your last major content word. A question from Wakana. What do we do? So we're talking about English pronunciation, specifically being used in a TOEFL test. Okay. And again, if you want to listen to the audio, you can go to youtube.com/fluentamerican. Let's listen to that section again one more time.
And I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library. I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be glad to.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Sure, I'd be glad to. Also, just a quick note about linking. Something that you can use to make your linking sound a little bit more natural is to make sure that your thought groups are attaching to each other. So, for instance, sure, I'd be glad to. Sure, I. Notice that R sound is attaching onto the I. It's like, sure, I'd be glad to. So instead of doing like, sure, I'd be glad to, it's more sure, I'd be glad to. Just that little bit of linking, something you can do to make it sound a little bit more natural. Question from Makana, what time is it here? It is almost 2 p.m. as well. So you're on the East Coast time. Our next section.
What's your major area of study?
What's your major area of study? Let's kind of listen to that one more time. What's your major area of study? What words are you hearing being stressed there? What's your major area of study?
Sure, I'd be glad to. What's your major area of study?
What's your major area of study? What's your major area of study? So I'm hearing 3 thought groups. So I'm hearing, what's your major area thought group of study? Oh God, that makes much more sense. Okay, so Wakana is actually in Japan as well. What's your major area of study? What's your major area of study? So once you have your thought groups, and this is an exercise you can do with any listening material you're using, whether it's a TV show, podcast, the news, something on YouTube, whatever you're using. Once you have thought groups, then you can try to focus a little bit more on stress, because every thought group has one major stress. Every thought group is going to have at least one major word of stress. Okay. So the stress that I'm hearing in this, and see if you agree with me. And if you disagree, be sure to let me know in the chat. You can say, so I'm hearing stress on what's your major area? I'm hearing a stress on major. And the last one on study. It's like, what's your major area of study? What's your major area of study? Those are the places where I am hearing the most stress. Okay. So what's your major area of study? Let me play that part again.
Really appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be glad to. What's your major area of study?
What's your major area of study? What's your major area of study? Okay. Hello, Daphne. Thanks for joining us. What kind of mentions again? They're in Japan. What city in Japan are you located in?
Latin American literature.
This Latin American literature. This brings up a great point. So just take a moment. How do you say this word? Latin. Latin. How do you say that yourself? Are you saying things like Latin, Latin, Latin? Yeah. Question from Mr. Big. Yeah. The chats may not allow you to send links. If you're trying to send a link, you'll really need to do it through the Google Docs. Just to know, if you're trying to get your own pronunciation analyzed today, you'll need to do it through the Google Doc that I've posted in the link. That's the only place that you'll be able to send that link right now, the current chat settings. So just to note. Okay. So again, if you're following on the Lang A stream and you want me to visit or analyze your pronunciation, you can do that in the chat box on the YouTube link I've posted, where you can send your audio. Okay, in the Google Doc. Okay. Moving on again. And we have a question from Wakana. Have I ever come to Japan? I have not come to Japan, though I've had many Japanese students before from all over Japan. So again, going back to that word Latin. So this is a case where you have this T sound that comes before an N. And we mentioned that, if you have a T sound that comes after an N, that it often goes silent, again, like an interview or center. But what happens if a T sound comes before an N? Well, typically what's going to happen is it's going to take on like this held T or a stop T sound. Okay. So what this means is you're not going to release the breath. So instead of saying like Latin, you'll need to say something like Latin. So you're not releasing the breath until you get actually to that N sound. You see this in other words as well. So for instance, words like mountain or like cotton or button, things like that. So these are all situations where you have a held T before an N. So for instance, mountain, that's usually how it's said. It's not usually going to be said as like mountain. It's more mountain and things like that. Wakana is mentioning about the joys of Japanese food. It's very delicious. I haven't had a whole lot of Japanese food, but the ones I've had were really good. Typical like ramen, sushi kinds of things. Latin American literature. Let's also hear where our distress is falling when he says this. Take a moment to listen to this. See if you can identify which words he's stressing.
What's your major area of study?
Latin American literature.
Latin American literature. Latin American literature. I think you could approach this two different ways. One of which we've talked about before. Hello, Ali. Thanks for joining the chat and joining us on the stream on YouTube. So the first way that I think you could pronounce this is like Latin American literature. The first way you could pronounce this is what we talked about earlier with like a 3-word group, where a little bit of a stress on the first one and then a heavier stress on the last word. It's like Latin American literature. Little stress on Latin, heavier stress on literature. Latin American literature. We have a note here. So I'm just making a note. So someone's saying they can't post the link. So let's see if we can put the link here, because I only have it protected for a few columns. Okay. Mr. Go Big, see if you can put the link that you found a little bit over here or anywhere in the document. See if you can post it anywhere in the document at all. The protections have been put down, so it should be anyone can add to the document. Okay. Michael asked a question, do we work at the radio? I do not work. I've never worked at a radio station before. I have not. Okay. So that's the first way I would recommend that you could pronounce this, like Latin American literature, Latin American literature. So that's the first way you could do it. A little stress on the first one, heavier stress on the third word. Another way, though, that you could also stress this is you could say, hey, I think every single one of these words is super important. So you could treat them each individually as a thought group. You can do like Latin American literature, Latin American literature. So you could do something like that as well. Okay, so I could either see a 3-word group or I could see it each individually. Either of those would be fine. Okay. What kind of mentions glad? Glad about what? We also have a question here. This is from YouTube chat. RF asks, Can you pronounce the word certificate? Certificate. So certificate. Certificate. So this is the case. So certificate. This T is usually going to be pronounced because it's part of the stressed syllable. It's like certif. You stress that second syllable with the T. So that means you're going to maintain the T sound. Certificate. Certificate. Other questions here. Oh, so kind of asked about the sentence with glad. So the sentence that they said was like, sure, I'd be glad to. Sure, I'd be glad to. Sure, I'd be glad to. So that was a sentence with glad. Other question here from Kasia on the Lang 8 stream. How do you pronounce the word long? Long. So it's more of an aw sound. Law, long, long. Okay, long. That is how you would pronounce that word. It has an aw sound. You may hear some people pronounce it with an ah sound. There are lots of native speakers that don't pronounce an aw sound. For instance, my wife. There's lots of people that would say it's like long, long, but the other pronunciation would be long. I would personally say it as long. Hello, Copland. Thanks for stopping by. Wakana, that's correct. I'd be glad to. I'd be glad to. Oh, Michael, thank you for sending the acorn. Mr. Big makes a note that they just posted a link to their audio. I will take a look at that. Hey, Wakana, no worries. Ask any question. I'm happy to answer any question here. Yeah. Just a quick note also about the word long, since someone was asking about that. One other thing you want to be mindful of the word long is that it has this NG sound at the end. So it's like, To make this NG sound, you need to do two things. You need the back of your tongue to be high and the front of your tongue to be down. Okay? It's like long, long. Make sure that the front of your tongue you're holding against the bottom of your mouth. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I'm curling the front of my tongue down. Like that. Okay. Back of your tongue needs to be high. This is a big thing, for instance, like Russian speakers. Like a word long often becomes like lawn. This can also be a big thing for my Mandarin speaking friends out there too. So just be careful. So again, it's not lawn, it's long. Keep that front of your tongue down. All right, we're going to take a quick break from our TOEFL section. So Mr. Big Go Home made a mention that they have sent me an audio file that we're going to take a quick look at. I think this is the one. Miss Cheetah. Okay, let's take a quick look at this. So again, if you want to have your own pronunciation analyzed by me, go to the YouTube stream. It's youtube.com/fluentamerican. Join our live stream there, and I have a link to a Google Doc where you can post your own audio file. Okay. So we're going to take a listen to this. The sentence I've been having people say is, this city isn't as big as his. This city isn't as big as his. That's the sentence we're practicing today. Lots of short I sounds. So we're going to see how well these sound here. And of course, as I go through this, be sure to let me know. Okay, let me move this over a bit. Okay, so let's take a listen.
This city isn't as big as his. This city isn't as big as his.
Okay, I'm going to play that one more time because I just want to hear it. Question 2 from Claplin about which is my favorite British English or American English? I mean, I'm very biased. You're talking about someone in North America. I prefer American personally.
This city isn't as big as his.
This city isn't as big as he is. He is. I want to hear that one more time. Because that last word, again, you're looking for like his, as his. That's kind of the section I'm particularly paying attention to right now. As his. This city isn't as big as his. This city isn't as big as his. Another thing, too, is that in this sentence, most likely the word that's going to be stressed is going to be his. This city. So you probably like, because you're comparing two things. You're comparing this city and you're comparing his city. So you're comparing these two things. So to make these things stand out, you're probably going to use some contrastive stress, put a little bit of stress on the first word, and then some heavy stress on the other thing you're comparing. It's like this city isn't as big as his. This city isn't as big as his. So I want to hear it again just for the stresses.
This city isn't as big as his.
And I feel like what I'm hearing is like he is, as opposed to his. Okay, so just making sure again, it's not really a diphthong for your vowel. It's just going to be a short I. His.
This city isn't as big as his.
I also want to hear the word big again.
This city isn't as big as his.
Mm-hmm.
This city isn't as big as his.
Yeah, I think the second time was a little bit better on his, but that's probably my biggest feedback. I think a lot of the things are sounding pretty good here. In general, I like your short I sounds. It's like city, big. I think those are sounding really clear, and that can be a difficult thing. The word city is not an easy word to say. A lot of students are saying like CD, as opposed to, or like CT or CT or things like that, when the more natural sound would be city in North America. So I really like how that's being read. I would just pay attention to that last part. Okay. Mr. Big, if that's helpful, be sure to let me know. If you have other questions about that sentence, Mr. Big, Mr. Go Big, let me know, and I'll try to answer them in more detail. All right, we're going to go back to our TOEFL analysis. Again, this is audio taken from the sample TOEFL test on the ETS website. So you can find the same audio on their website. We talked about Latin American literature. Okay, we can see that this librarian, her next sentence is going to be pretty long. Wakana is also mentioning too that they're going to test. So to take like a placement test to make effort to study harder. Yeah, I mean, my recommendation is, try to, especially, when you're practicing listening or when you're practicing reading, trying to be as active as you can. Take some notes, pay attention to new vocab and things like that. Also set goals for yourself as you listen. Don't just listen, don't just read. Try to be as active as possible. All right, so the next section from our TOEFL.
Okay. Well, over here's the section where we have language, literature, and the arts.
So over here's the section where we have language, literature, and the arts. Language, literature, and the arts. One thing you're going to notice is that they're going to use a falling intonation on arts, language, literature, and the arts. If you use a rising intonation there, because you have this list, like language, literature, and the arts. But you also know that they're going to have more information coming after this. So another intonation pattern that you may hear is kind of like a fall rise, so like in the arts, language, literature, and the arts. And so that's just another pattern that you may hear. Mr. Go Big asked about donations. For the moment, no, I don't have a way to do donations. Just I appreciate it. In the future, I'll look into options and things like that. But for now, it's just some goodwill. I appreciate doing it. Thank you for sending your audio, Mr. Go Big. I appreciate the interaction. One way you can donate is just by, sharing the video, sharing the videos, sharing the channel. Just supporting the channel in that way is huge. So again, going back, I want to play back that audio from that sentence. As I'm finding that audio spot, Michael asked a question. I asked a question on my profile recently. Couldn't you answer it? Could you answer it? Michael, let me know what the question is. If you can type the question, I'll try to answer it.
Over here's the section where we have...
Over here's the section. This is a really helpful pattern for when you need to give directions. Like over here's the section. Over here's the section. So like putting some of that heavy stress on here. Over here's the section.
Language, literature, and the art.
Language, literature, and the arts. Language, literature, and the arts. So again, when you have lists, you want to make sure your patterns are pretty regular. Like language, literature. Notice they sound very similar in terms of pattern. Language, literature. Okay.
We have language, literature, and the arts. And
language, literature, and the arts. Also, just quick note on the word language. This is often a word that is mispronounced by a lot of people. A lot of people do like language or something like that with language. A short I sound linking with that idge, language.
If you go downstairs, you'll find...
If you go downstairs, and if you go downstairs, thought group. If you go downstairs,
find the history section.
You'll find the history section. What word do you hear being stressed there? You'll find the history section. If you go downstairs, you'll find the history section. Which word's being stressed? I'll play it one more time too for my YouTube people.
Arts. And if you go downstairs, you'll find the history section.
Stress going to be on the word history. So why is history getting stressed? So you'll find the history section. You go downstairs, you'll find the history section. Why are we putting the stress on history? Well, this is largely because this is a compound noun. And if you're not familiar with compound nouns, we've talked about them in some other videos, but a compound noun is when you have two or more words that join together to make one specific thing. So for my people coming from like Asian languages, for instance, people like Mandarin speakers, Korean speakers, Japanese speakers, like a lot of languages where you have two or more units that often join together to make a single word. This is kind of functioning the same way in English. Like history section. A history section is a specific thing, a history section. So some other examples of this, like a cell phone, or like a math class, or a textbook, or like a drugstore. These are all examples of compound nouns where you have two or more words, but they're really only one specific thing. And when that happens, you want to stress the first word. We have some other questions too on the Lang A stream, so may I modify my essay in my profile? Yeah, you can always modify what your profile says, I imagine, right? Michael has a question about the pronunciation in his profile. Michael, if you could type it into the chat. Right now, I've got a lot of things going on. So if you could type it in chat, I'll be happy to take a look at the question there. Or if you send me a message after class, I can try to take a look. From the history section. So again, going back to compound nouns, that's why in history section, you want to make sure you stress history. So instead of saying history section, it's going to be more history section. And if you're not sure if you're hearing the difference between these, you could just do some quick tests. So for instance, like swimming pool, deep pool. Notice that in swimming pool, you stress swimming. Notice that in deep pool, you stress pool. Or for instance, newspaper versus new paper. Newspaper versus new paper. Newspaper, you stress news. New paper, you stress paper. It's like I bought a newspaper versus I have some new paper. So just little things like that, differences between compound nouns. Another pronunciation question too is the difference between man and men. What's the difference between man and men? So for man, this is probably, in my opinion, this is one of the most difficult words in English. It's one that so many people are mispronouncing. It is because you had this a sound in man, the first word with the a. What kind of I and I will actually be pronounced the same. But for man, so you have this a sound, like for instance in a word like cat or black. So you want to make sure your mouth is wide enough, like ah. Notice that the corners of my lips are pulling, so you can see my lips pulling this way. Meh, ah. Okay. And of course, placement. Placement, as always, if you're not familiar with what placement is where you're projecting from. In English, you project from your throat. It's low in the throat and relaxed. So you should be feeling it right here. If you say man and you feel pronunciation in your head, like if you're like me, I'm feeling that vibration like around here. That's a sign that you're too high. Your placement is too high. You need to be feeling this down here. So it's not me, it's more meh, ah. But because this a sound is coming before a nasal sound, this letter N, you're going to get some changes here. So for instance, you're going to feel your tongue going back a little bit. Hello, Anne. Thanks for joining us. You're going to feel your tongue sliding back a little bit. And also, instead of you get slightly more like eh. Then, before the letter N, you're going to do a heavy breath out of your nose. It's like and. So together, this is going to become man. Try to say that a bit. If this is tricky, I have a video that just talks about how to link a sounds with nasals that you can find on our channel. If you go on my channel and just search for nasals, you'll see the video. But yeah, so I would really recommend that for man. Versus that second word, men. So the difference here for men, M-E-N, men, is that you want your tongue to take up a lot of space in your mouth. So you want to raise the back, the middle, and the front. You want all those to be higher. Your mouth doesn't need to be super open, so you can close your mouth more. It's like meh. So again, compare meh versus meh. So close your mouth more, raise your tongue higher, but your placement is still low in the throat. So that second word is going to be men. So again, your two words are man and men. Man, men. Some other similar words. Pan, like P-A-N, versus pen, P-E-N. Pan and pen. What kind of mentions the words fresh and flesh? So these both have the S sound, like in men, M-E-N. Okay. Difference here will be the R sound and the L sound, like fresh versus flesh. Okay, so again, those are just some quick notes about man and men. So Michael, if you have other questions about those, be sure to let me know. Based on what you're hearing. You can also, Michael, if you go to the YouTube stream, and if you post a, I've posted again a link to the Google Doc where you can send in your own audio for me to take a look at. So if you do that before the stream is over, I'll be happy to take a look at the audio file. You can just send me a recording that says man and men, and that'd be fine. Okay. I know we had mentioned that we're going back to the TOEFL listening. So again, if you just recently joined us on the Lang 8 stream, if you go to youtube.com/fluentamerican, you'll be able to hear the audio and see the transcript I'm working with.
Find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature.
Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature. Another question, have I ever been to Japan? I have not been to Japan. Everyone wants to know if I've been to Japan today. I'm not sure why. I want to play that TOEFL section again.
Section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature find.
I want to see if I can identify the thought groups here. I'm going to play that one more time. As I'm playing the sentence, see if you can notice how many thought groups are here. Are there two? Are there three? Is it just one? Where do you think the pauses are?
Upstairs, you'll find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature.
So I'm hearing a thought group after generally. I'm also hearing one more thought group. I'll play it again. See if you can identify where I think the second thought group should go.
Upstairs, you'll find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature.
Well, now I heard that again, and now I have doubts. I was originally hearing it after in, but now I'm wondering if there's actually maybe a third thought group.
Upstairs, you'll find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American.
I feel like I'm hearing another thought group between right around like students who. Let me see if I can find the exact spot.
If you go downstairs, you'll find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature.
Yes, I'm hearing a thought group between who and concentrate. So in terms of stresses, I'm hearing a stress on generally. Students, concentrate, and also literature with that 3-word group. Okay, so there's a place on playing stress. I'll play that audio again in a moment so we can check ourselves. We have a question, though. It's from the Lang 8 stream. What does it mean to bite or bit the bullet? Bite the bullet, or past tense would be bit the bullet. What that means is that you do something even though you know it's going to be painful or that you don't want to do it. So you're doing something because you don't want to or because it's going to be painful. So for instance, like, it's raining outside, but I bit the bullet and gave the dog a walk because I know that he needed to go outside. So I finally bit the bullet and took my dog for a walk. I didn't want to, but I knew I didn't want to get wet, but my dog needed a walk, so I took him for a walk. Because that's kind of what it means with bite the bullet. Okay. Other question here from another question too. This is from the YouTube stream. So this is from IELTS or TOEFL. Which test do you consider harder to get a top score? I mean, they're both measuring the same thing. IELTS, TOEFL, they're doing the same thing. I'll put it this way. I was an examiner for the IELTS speaking and writing test. I was a proctor for TOEFL, so I didn't do any grading for TOEFL, but I did do grading for IELTS. I would put it more like this. If you are more familiar with pronunciation in American English, the TOEFL test will probably be a little easier. If you're familiar with pronunciation for more British training, then I would recommend taking the IELTS test. Honestly, that's kind of how I would go about it. If you don't like typing, if you don't enjoy typing on a computer, IELTS might be a better option just because it's easier to find a paper-based test for IELTS. though I know TOEFL does have a paper-based version, but it may be harder to find. But yeah, in terms of grading and how they work and things like that, I mean, they're all very similar. So you kind of just base it on your own language preference. American English, go with TOEFL. British English, go with IELTS. You know. We have question 2. Do I know I am not familiar with that. Is that a language test? I want to play the audio again just to double check the thought groups and the stresses.
Upstairs, you'll find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature find themselves researching.
Yeah, so that's really why I'm hearing the stress and function. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature. And then that second part.
In Latin American literature find themselves researching in the history section a lot.
Find themselves researching in the history section a lot. Find themselves researching in the history section a lot. So I'm hearing stress on themselves researching history section a lot. A little stress on a lot. Play it one more time. See if you agree with my stresses there.
Concentrate in Latin American literature find themselves researching in the history section a lot.
Find themselves researching in the history section a lot. Because that's kind of what I'm hearing for that section there. Okay. A question from Anne again with a ton of numbers. Are you an English teacher? Yes, I've been an English teacher since 2010. Other question here from Mr. Big. Go home. What's the difference between people and persons? People is going to be the much more standard form of the plural. You're much more likely to see people as the plural than persons. Persons is usually going to be a singular form. Usually it's person. Is it wrong to use persons? Not necessarily, but I think that you're going to be much, much, much more likely to use people. Like, yeah, I would say in general for most cases, unless you're comfortable, with persons, I would really recommend using people. If you are really curious about persons, you're like, I want to use persons. I want to, that's something that interests me. I want to use persons in my daily life. What you can do is you want to find some example sentences. So one thing I would recommend for people outside of China, I would recommend using Google. If you're in China, then you can also use Bing. Type in the word persons, put in quotation marks, so you get exact usage. And what you'll want to do is look at the search results you'll get. So for instance, notice I'm getting lots and lots of pages of results. I'm going to skip down to for instance, page 9 or 10. You don't want to start with the first pages because the first pages may be dictionaries and things like that. So one thing I'm seeing a lot with persons, I'm seeing missing persons, persons with disabilities, disabled persons. I'm seeing a lot of patterns here. I'm seeing names. I'm seeing missing persons. I'm seeing, again, names of companies, persons, firm, missing persons, disabilities again, blocked persons, prohibited persons. So what's kind of happening here is that it seems a lot like persons is used a lot more with kind of legal terms or technical terms for people. Whereas people is kind of the more general thing. So I think in most situations, unless you're talking about something really technical, people is probably going to be the form that you'll want to use most often, in all honesty. And you probably won't need to use persons much in your daily life. If you're just conversing with friends, you're probably not going to need to use the word persons, I'll be honest. We have another question too. When does this live end? I don't know. I have another class in about a half hour or so. Although my throat is also getting super dry because I always forget to bring water when I'm doing this. So yeah, I'll probably go through at least a little bit more of the TOEFL test, answer some more questions. Again, if you're interested in getting your own pronunciation analyzed, there's still time. If you go to youtube.com/fluentamerican, I've included a link to a Google Doc where you can post your own pronunciation file. I go through the steps of how you can do that. Let me know, and I will be happy to take a look at that. Okay, we've already looked at least one person's. So you can always add your own file to the Google Doc, and I'll be happy to look at it, analyze your pronunciation. Okay, let's take a look at our next section of the TOEFL. Some other quick questions too. This person's focusing on individuality. Yeah, Mr. Biggs, I hope I answered the question there. I think it's more like kind of like a legal sort of term. It's more often you'll see persons. Other question here, how often do we do live streams? So live streams on YouTube and are always going to be on Saturdays around this time. It's like 13:30, 1:30, New York time. We have a question here as well about what's the difference between second and third conditional. So some grammar questions. Okay, we can do grammar too. I'm just going to put this right into the Google Doc. Okay, so your second conditional. Zoom in a bit so you can see this. So your second conditional is also called like an unreal present. Something that is not true. Something that's not true right now. So that's what your second conditional means. But what does that actually mean? Though? So like what can I do with this? Okay. Well, what this can do is that let's say you have a situation where like if I don't know, like if I were, for example, if I were rich, I would buy almost something that's rich people buy. I would buy a fancy dinner. Something like that. If I were rich, I would buy a fancy dinner. Think about what this sentence means. What this sentence means is I'm not rich. So it's not true that I'm rich. It's also not true that it's like I don't buy fancy dinners very often. Okay. So second conditional is talking about something that's not true right now or habitually. Okay. Notice how I'm getting this. So I'm using if plus a quote unquote simple past followed by would and a base verb. And again, key thing to remember is that this means right now. Don't let this simple past fool you. The part that confuses people is they see the simple past and they think, oh, this is the past. No, if you see that if before it, then that's going to change it. So you're talking about a hypothetical situation right now. What kind of, I do not know what, I know what it is in terms of like the anime or whatever, but I have not actually seen it. But I've heard it's good.
You're right.
Let's talk a little bit about then, let's contrast this with the third conditional, which is also called the unreal past. Something that was not true in the past. To give you an example, if I had been rich last year, I would have bought a fancy dinner. I would have bought a fancy dinner then. So now, notice that I'm talking about the past. So I was not rich last year. And also, I didn't buy fancy dinners last year. So that's what our third conditional is. And notice the difference here for our third conditional is that if plus the past perfect followed by would plus have plus your past participle. Okay, so those are just a real quick rundown of your second conditional and third conditional. There are tons of exercises on this stuff online. I'd recommend going through some of those. It can be confusing because there's also mixed conditionals that work with both of these. So just be mindful of that. But these are the main differences between the second conditional and third conditional. Okay. Okay, so I do hope that was helpful. If you feel comfortable with that, so I'm saying that was a great example. I appreciate that. I would definitely recommend doing some exercise online, just to solidify it. It's not enough just see an explanation. You got to try to practice it and see how it works. Okay. We have some other quick questions here. How do you pronounce exactly think and think? Oh, thing and think. Good question. So let's talk. Mr. Go Big, I see your question. I will play that in a moment. To your questions, anyways. But what's the difference between situations and circumstances? Honestly, Mr. Go Big or Go Home, those are they're used as synonyms a lot. Like under different circumstances, under a different situation, they're really honestly used as synonyms. My best suggestion would be to find like 5 or 6 example sentences that use situations, and then another 5 or 6 sentences that use like circumstances, because it may come down to just kind of like collocations in which situation you use which word. Okay. I would say situations is probably the more common, but that doesn't mean circumstances is inappropriate. So I'll definitely take a look at that. Going back to our question here from Ann, difference between thing and think. So the difference is all about the back of your tongue. So for thing, what you're doing is you're lowering the front of your tongue and you're raising the back of your tongue. It's like for that NG type sound. Making sure again that the back of your tongue is high enough and the front of your tongue is low enough. It's like Okay. Whereas when you say think, when you make that sound, you're making some contact with the back of your tongue and your mouth, but in general, you're much more relaxed and you're not as high. The back of your tongue doesn't need to go as high. When you make that sound, the back of your tongue has to go really high. When you make that sound, your tongue doesn't have to go as high. And you're also hear the difference in air. Like when you say think, you can really feel that breath escaping, right? Versus when you say thing, notice that you're not losing that breath. You don't feel that breath escaping as much. Okay, it's like thing versus think, or like sing versus sink, or like bring versus brink. Just some more examples. Muhammad, thank you so much for the acorn. I appreciate it. We had another question here from Mr. Go Big or Go Home. What's the difference between who and whom? Use the word who, and then my two straight up started cracking. I don't fully understand why they're cracking up. Whom is a grammatical form, as an object, but it's also one that is slowly disappearing. So I wouldn't even call it wrong necessarily to use who instead of whom nowadays, unless you're writing something that's like super academic or technical. The reality is that probably in the future, whom won't exist as much anymore. But to answer your question, whom is an object. So for instance, the person whom I met, that's an object. I, subject, met, verb, whom, the person. So person is the object there. So we're replacing it with whom. Okay, I met whom I met. Whereas who is a subject. So for instance, the person who loves cooking. Who is subject, loves, verb, cooking, object. Okay. So that's the big difference between who and whom. Who is a subject, whom is an object. Again, in spoken English, you don't hear whom very often. I'll be honest with you. Partly because you use whom a lot. Like you use these who or whoms a lot in like adjective clauses and things like that. If you're not sure what adjective clauses are, I really recommend studying them. So again, adjective clauses, that's where you see them used the most. But the thing is, in an adjective clause, you don't usually need an object. So you can usually take them out. So for instance, the person whom I met, fine. But usually it's just going to be the person I met. You don't usually use a pronoun. The person I met. The person whom I met was nice. The person I met was nice. You don't usually use objects. So that's another reason why whom's not super common. I hope that answers your question. Okay, let's do this. I am kind of getting to that point where I need to prepare for my next class. So I'm going to hang on here for about another minute or so, just see if other people have some questions that I haven't had a chance to answer to. Again, if you're following on YouTube and you want to get some pronunciation feedback, this is kind of your last chance for today. I've posted a link again to a Google Doc where you can send me your audio file, and I'll be happy to take a quick look at it. This is also something that I plan to make something more a regular feature of the live streams. So I'll try to post links before the live stream in the future, so that way you can send audio files for me beforehand, before the actual stream. If you have other questions, of course, grammar, focused, pronunciation focused, English focused, life focused. We can also talk about those. Muhammad, if I didn't say it, thank you so much for the acorn. I believe I said it, but I may have forgot. Another question here from Mr. Go Big. What's the difference between unreal and surreal? So a lot of times, like, surreal means more like if you're familiar with like surrealism, or if you're familiar with Salvador Dali, the painter. A lot of times the word surreal is applied to his work. Surreal almost is like kind of like something has like a dream-like quality, or it's so, in a way, like strange that it doesn't even seem like it doesn't seem like it's part of this world. Okay, like if something's very surreal, it can mean like really, really strange, or really, really weird, in the sense of like otherworldly. It's like a lot. In fact, that whole art style, like surrealism, is all about kind of things that are just really things you wouldn't encounter in the real world. Like, for instance, like melting clocks, or like disfigured bodies and things like that. Unreal is an adjective that can mean just not real. So, for instance, like in an unreal conditional, it means like it's not a true situation. It's not true. Like if I were rich, that means I'm not rich. It's not true that I'm rich. But a lot of times, like unreal also has the sense of like like if you hear it in speech, like if you say, oh, like the dinner I had last night was unreal, like that means like it can mean like something like really, really good, like in terms of like slang and how people use it. So can you use the word fantasy for surreal? I think there can be ties to it, but a lot of times, like if you say fantasy, people are going to be thinking like, oh, like wizards, or like dragons and magic and things like that. And that's not really, like you wouldn't call like Harry Potter surreal. I think surreal has more of like almost like a strange quality to it, almost like unsettling. Like it almost makes you feel like, oh, this makes me feel like mildly uncomfortable, and not necessarily in a bad way. Yeah, as always, my biggest suggestion, is to try to find some example sentences that use the word surreal. You can even like, I'm sharing my screen, so why not just take a look? We take a look at surrealism art, some quick pictures, which you can find on Google. So just like some unreal thing, like for instance, like here, how about this like elephant with like butterfly wings and things like that? So these are all elements of surrealism. So you can just kind of find that online. Okay. Last few questions. So we have a question: how do we say the word botched? Botched. So for botched, you have a couple options. You could say botched and pronounce that T sound at the end, like botched, botched. You could also hold it if you wanted. You could be like botched. I botched the test. I botched the test. So you could use a held T or a stop T at the end. I think that's perfectly acceptable. Notice also too that botched, this is a case where the letter O has an ah sound. It's like ba, ah, ba, botched, botched. You want to make sure you're not saying like botched, or like something like that, like an aw sound or an all sound. Making sure, of course, your placement's low in the throat and relaxed enough. All right, I'll stay on, see if anyone has one or two more questions before we go. Last chance again to get an audio file in if you have any questions about that. And again, we do these streams every Saturday at around this time, around 1:30. The other thing I would really recommend, I'll give you guys back your screen on YouTube. The other thing I would recommend, if you found this type of analysis helpful, like for instance, you enjoy trying to find like thought groups, stress, and things like that. I have a new series of lessons called, this is our influencer group. And what we do, this is going to be on Mondays. Currently on Mondays, though the time may change in the future. We just analyze a native speaker conversation, and we try to identify stress thought groups, and then try to do a little bit of shadowing with it as well, and answering more pronunciation questions as well. So if you have some questions about that, or you find that analysis really helpful, our first couple workshops are going to be free, and you can check our community tab to see information about that as well. Last question here is, what's the difference between weird, strange, and bizarre. I mean, what can I say? These really are synonyms, and eccentric. Eccentric is probably going to be the easier one to explain. But weird, strange, bizarre, honestly, those are all synonyms. My biggest suggestion would be to try to find some collocations to see what common words go with each of them. So for instance, if you're not sure how to do that, what you can do, you can go to, let me share my screen again. Of course, every time I turn it off, I end up needing it again. Hang on, I'll put it back on. Okay. So let's just kind of see like a weird, I get a weird color, a weird fact, a weird animal, a weird person, a weird taste, a weird picture. Let's kind of see what I get with bizarre. That's the thing, a bizarre day, a bizarre journey. So it seems like day and journey. Strange, I think that was our next one, right? It's like strange is used a lot in, let's see, these are all titles of things. The last word you had was eccentric. Okay, and eccentric means like, it doesn't mean strange things that, but it means like kind of like a very, like an eccentric. How do you describe like an eccentric personality? Like someone that's like extremely strange or like extremely into something. Like if someone has an eccentric personality, like it's like a very like a super unique personality that may be super passionate about certain things. I want to see just really quick what other definitions I can find for eccentric to see if they can help. Give me one moment. Yeah, a lot of times eccentric is used to describe people. So that's the first thing I would really say. Eccentric isn't usually used to describe like things. It's usually used to describe people's personalities. A lot of times eccentric is also kind of associated with not necessarily mental illness, but kind of like mental instability a lot of times. So for that reason, I would say it often has more of a negative connotation, but it doesn't have to be negative. It could be neutral. Yeah. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. As always, I really recommend trying to find as many example situations as you can. Sergio's here. Hello, Sergio. Thank you for joining us today. Oh, this is my New Zealand Sergio, I'm guessing. Or maybe not. No, that's Sergey. No, I'm messing up all kinds of things. Thanks for joining us. I'm about to head out, but if you have any quick questions I can answer for you, that would be great. Yeah, and like I said before, guys, if you're interested in this type of analysis and things like that, we'd love to have you in our influencer group, which again meets on Mondays, and we analyze people's speech. It's free through the beginning of October. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Mr. Big, Mr. Go Big, thank you so much for your questions, as well as one Star Wars fan, and also all our friends on the Lang 8 stream. I've appreciated being able to talk with you guys. I hope to talk to you again soon next week. Have a good day. Have a good night. Good afternoon. Keep an eye out for our next YouTube video, which will be coming out tomorrow. You guys take care.